I was born small. That's the first thing you should know about me, because it's the first thing everyone else ever noticed. Small hands, small feet, quick eyes. Good for threading a needle, good for slipping through a hedgerow, good for dying quietly where a big man would die loud. My home was Underdell, an agri-world of terraced valleys and grain silos the size of hab blocks, where the wind smelled of cut barley and diesel from the threshers, and the soil was black and rich enough to stain your knees for a week. We were tithed grain, and we were tithed men. Small men mostly. Rattling stock, generations deep, bred for close work in the grain hollows where the big folks' machines couldn't reach. My people didn't dream of glory. We dreamed of a full larder and a warm hearth and being left alone by the tax collectors. The Imperium doesn't care what you dream. It cares what it can use you for. I held a weapon before I held a proper meal most days. My uncle put an old long-lass in my hands when I was 7, showed me how to lie flat in the barley and drop crows off the silo roofs without so much as bending a stalk around me. He said a ratling who can't shoot straight is just vermin waiting to be trapped. I believed him. I still do. The first death I ever saw close wasn't glorious either. It was a thresher accident. A big man, a foreman, caught his sleeve and went in whole. I was 11. I remember the smell more than the sight. Hot iron and wet grain and something underneath that I didn't have a word for yet. My uncle didn't let me look away. He said, looking away doesn't stop it happening, it just means you flinch again the next time. Learn it now, cheap. Learn it later, expensive. That was Underdell wisdom. And it turned out to be Imperial wisdom too. The tithe ships came when I was 14. Not a request, a quota. Read off a list by a man in a long coat who never once raised his voice, because he never needed to. My name was on it. So was my cousin Tam's. So was near a third of my hollow. My mother didn't cry where I could see her. She packed my kit and told me not to steal from the guardsmen, because they'd hang a rattling for it faster than they'd hang one of their own. Advice, not sentiment. That was her way. I shipped out as Trooper Nettlebury, attached to the 3rd Underdell Scout Auxilia, a company built entirely of small folk like me, thrown in as eyes and ears and long rifles for the big regiments who wouldn't look at us twice otherwise. We weren't proper guard, in most human eyes. Auxilia, support. The word they used most when they thought we couldn't hear was vermin with rifles. I heard it plenty. You learn to let it slide off mostly. My first commissar was a woman named Vantry Oskold, and she did not care that I was small. That was, in its own way, a kind of respect. She lined the whole auxilia up on the transport deck inside a week of departure and told us plainly, the guard does not care if you are big or small, brave or frightened, good or bad at heart. The guard cares if you hold the line when you're told to hold it. A ratling who runs is shot the same as a giant who runs. She had a man from the Coldhurst 4th shot in front of us not 2 days later for falling asleep on watch during a warp transit drill. I want to tell you it horrified me. It didn't, not the way you'd think. It clarified things. That was the philosophy of the regiment distilled into one crack of a bolt pistol. Purpose over fear, discipline over sentiment, the mission larger than the man. I carried that lesson the rest of my life, whether I wanted to or not. Coming of age in the Guard isn't a birthday. It's a ceremony called the Long Vigil, where new recruits stand a full night's watch on the hull of the transport. No relief, no food, rifle held at ready the whole time, while veterans walk the line and decide who's worth keeping. I stood mine beside 5 others who became, for a while, the closest thing I had to family. There was Corporal Hesse Rennick, oldest of us, a stump-fingered veteran who'd lost half a hand to frostbite on some Ice World campaign before I ever met her, and who could still outshoot every one of us with the other. There was Bittle, a jumpy, fast-talking lad who told terrible jokes at terrible times and somehow made them land anyway. There was Fen Corrigal, quiet, devout, who kept a little brass aquila on a cord and touched it before every action like it was the only solid thing left in the galaxy. There was Marrow. Not his real name, we never learned his real name. A scavenger sort who could find contraband rations in a war zone that had been picked clean twice over. And there was Ket Doverbrook, my rival more than my friend in those early days, sharper-tongued than me, better shot than me by a hair, and we spent half our early service trying to prove otherwise to each other. Our first real deployment was an ambush, and it taught me that everything Vantry Oscold said about discipline was true, because discipline was the only thing that kept any of us alive that night. We were escort scouts for a supply column moving through broken Hab ruin on a client world whose name I've mostly let myself forget. Orcs hit us from the collapsed underlevels. No warning, no vox chatter picked up. Just a wall of green flesh and crude iron come howling up out of the dark like the ground itself had turned hostile. I remember the noise most. Orcs don't fight quiet. They laugh. They roar. Somewhere in the chaos one of them was singing, actually singing, some tuneless bellow of a war chant while it swung a cleaver the size of a door. The smell was worse than the noise. Promethium smoke, blood, the acrid stink of their crude guns. Bittle went down first, caught across the chest by something that didn't even look aimed, just thrown. He didn't scream. That's the part that stays with you. He just went quiet, mid-joke, and that was that. We held the line because Hessa told us to hold the line, in a voice that didn't leave room for argument, and because a long las in a steady hand can put a shot through an orc's eye at 400 meters if the hand doesn't shake. Mine shook. I fired anyway. That's the whole secret to soldiering, I think. Not being brave, just firing anyway. The campaign ground on for the better part of 2 years after that, chasing that same orc horde across 3 systems as it swelled with every world it touched, the way orcs always do. More of them born from the fighting itself. More war machines cobbled together out of scrap. More of that terrible, delighted brutality. We learned the grinding arithmetic of the Guard in those years. Power packs rationed to 3 per trooper per engagement. Ration bricks stretched thin enough you could see light through them. Reinforcements arriving as green as we'd once been, and dying just as fast. Fenn touched his aquila before every action, and it didn't save him from losing 2 fingers to a stray round outside a place called Corvin Reach, but he kept touching it anyway. Ket made sergeant before I did, and needled me about it for a month straight, and I hated her for it in the small, comfortable way you hate someone you'd die for. The horror came later, and it wasn't orcs. It was on a dead moon we'd been sent to secure thin atmosphere, thinner light, where a cult had been quietly rotting the garrison from the inside for longer than anyone had noticed. I still don't have good words for what we found in the lower vaults. The air went wrong before we saw anything. Thick, wet feeling, though the void outside was bone dry. There were symbols scratched into the walls that hurt to look at directly, the way a too bright light hurts, except it wasn't light. Marrow started reciting numbers under his breath, over and over, and he wasn't a man given to nerves. Then the vault door at the end of the corridor opened on its own, slow, and something came through that wore a man's shape, the way a puppet wears cloth. I won't describe it further than that. Something shouldn't be given more shape in the telling than they had in the seeing. What I'll say is this. Hessa gave the order to burn the vault, Promethium and all, sealing 4 of our own wounded inside it, along with whatever that thing was. Because the alternative, letting it reach the surface, letting it reach a ship, letting it reach anywhere with more people in it, was worse. She didn't hesitate long. Long enough that I saw it cost her. Not long enough to matter. That's the decision the Guard trains into you. The mission survives, even when pieces of you don't. I still hear that vault door some nights. We got the news about Kaldren Hive 3 months after the moon. A world I'd never set foot on. Hundreds of light years off, but half the Guard had cousins or comrades stationed there, and its fall went through the regiment like a physical blow. An entire hive spire gone under in a matter of days to a warp incursion nobody saw coming until the sky itself split open above it. Billions, the Vox officers said, in the flat, careful tone people use for numbers too large to actually feel. It wasn't just the dying, it was what it meant, that a world that size, that fortified, that certain of its own permanence, could simply stop existing. For a while I didn't know what I was fighting for anymore. If Caldren could fall, Underdell could fall. My mother's grain hollow, my uncle's silo roof, all of it just as breakable as anywhere else. It was Hessa who set me right, the night the news came down, sitting on an ammo crate cleaning a rifle she didn't need to clean. She said the Emperor never promised us a world that couldn't fall. He promised us the will to hold it anyway for as long as we could, and to make the enemy pay in blood for every meter. She said Caldren's spires would rise again someday, or they wouldn't. And either way, the only thing that was ever truly ours to control was whether we stood or ran when our own hour came. I didn't feel comforted exactly, I felt steadied. There's a difference, and in the Guard, steadied is what you get. I made sergeant myself, eventually, over a company of green recruits from a dozen worlds that weren't Underdell, humans twice my height, an abhuman or two, once even a squad of Voidborn who'd never seen open sky before. None of them knew my hollow, my hearth, my mother's voice. I stopped trying to teach them Underdell. I taught them the regiment instead. Hold the line. Fire anyway. Mourn later. Mission first. Culture doesn't need a homeland to survive. It just needs someone stubborn enough to keep carrying it forward. Ket didn't make it to see me pinned sergeant. Mero did. Then didn't, 6 months after. Fen's Aquila is in my kit now, because somebody has to keep touching it. I'm the only one of the 6 from that long vigil still breathing as far as I know, and I've stopped expecting that to change what it means to be small. It never did. It just meant I was harder to hit. Tomorrow I ship out again. Older now, slower in the knees, faster still with a long lars than most men half my size will ever manage, which isn't saying much given my size, but I'll take the joke. Bittle would have wanted me to. I've got a new company under me, none of them from Underdell, all of them scared in the particular quiet way recruits try to hide and never quite manage. I'll stand them their own long vigil tonight. I'll tell them what Vantry Oskold told me. I'll tell them what Hessa told me on that ammo crate. I won't tell them everything about the vault, because some things a person should learn slower than I did, if the galaxy is kind enough to let them. I am small, and I am tired, and I am not finished. That is the whole of what I have to offer the Emperor tomorrow, and I offer it without complaint, because complaining never once stopped a bolt round, or fed a hungry world, or held a line that needed holding. Whatever comes through the dark tomorrow, orc, cultist, worse, it will find Underdell's sons and daughters still standing in the grain, still aiming true, still small enough to slip past where the big folk can't, and too stubborn by half to lie down. The silo roof holds.